folks. I'm your host, Bob Geller. Welcome to this episode of PR Done and Dunner. As I'm sure you know, we've covered executive communication and leadership quite a bit in this podcast, but our guest today brings a very fresh and interesting perspective. He's an expert in human behavior and body language, having trained the Army, been on TV, written books. He advises business leaders on the topic. He's also a YouTuber, part of a very successful channel, and that's how I came to discover his expertise. Without further ado, let me welcome Gregory Hartley of Behavior Panel fame. Welcome, Greg. How are you?
Thanks, Bob. Great. I appreciate the invite.
My pleasure. And it's great to have you on. This is a real honor. What I wanted to do is start out by talking a little bit about the behavior panel, because that's how I came to learn about what you do and kind of connect it with the interests and topics that we cover here. And you're probably not going to gush about it. So let me gush about it for you and explain to the audience a little bit about why I find it so interesting. First of all, it's four panelists who are one quarter of the behavior panel. You take a dry topic, potentially dry topic, turn it into a fun and educational one. There's four panelists. How it works is they take turns analyzing videos of various evildoers and interesting characters. Inevitably choose very interesting and topical subjects. I came for the serial killers. I stayed for the rogue CEOs, because I'm a true crime buff, but you manage to span all those areas. The jargon, I've learned the jargon. I've learned a lot about, I think, the techniques. It can sound like a play-by-play of an Olympic event. There is a flexion. There is a shoulder shrug. That's two shoulder shrug. Watch for that chin jump. So it's a lot of fun. You have a lot of camaraderie with the other panelists. And like I said, they're very interesting. It's all interesting. And throughout, you're looking for clues, comparing notes. Are the subjects lying? Are they convincing? Are the interviewers or interrogators doing a good job? So I don't know. Do you think I've done a good job of explaining it? Anything I've left out there?
Yeah, Bob, I always say we cover politicians, murderers, and other liars. It's just one of those things where people are in a bind and they're trying to protect themselves. So that just about any topic, whether it's business, business is close to my heart, of course, as well. But whether it's business or it's crime or it's politics, usually somebody's gotten themselves in a bind, and we want to say, are they telling the truth? Or are they not telling the truth? Today, right now, at 12:30 on Thursday, these guys are premiering one about the UFO whistleblower, just to give you an example.
Oh,
so we
really?
pick topics that,
Okay.
what I usually say is we have a skill set that lets us look behind somebody's face a little better than average. And what we're trying to do is give you that skill set. So our jargon is, we try to educate that jargon as we go. So it's not just us talking with play by play, but you understand it when we're talking about it. And that's our intent.
That's
Good
true.
crew, guys.
You take your time, explain it, and I've learned a lot. I've watched a lot of the podcasts. I think the audience would enjoy it too, so I urge you to check it out on YouTube. What is it? Behaviorpanel.com as well. You have a website?
Yeah, we have the behaviorpanel.com is the web page, and there you can find links to all kinds of stuff. We've got a few courses in that if you're interested in that kind of thing, some publicity stuff there. And a lot of times we'll put in appearances. We all do TV work and that kind of thing as well. So.
Now, you are one quarter of the behavior panel. So what specific expertise do you bring? Perhaps you have your own.
So yeah, I always say expertise is in the eye of the beholder. I give you my qualifications. You decide how expert I am. I did 20 years in the U.S. military. I was an Army interrogator, Arabic speaking specifically, worked in anti-terror and that for part of my years. But I'll give you my short little spiel, my intro.
Sure.
Former Army interrogator, interrogation instructor, resistance to interrogation instructor. Written 10 books on body language and behavior. Spend most of my time with business. That's my little spiel.
Okay, interesting. That makes a lot of sense. We probably should take a little time first. We're going to get deep into the topic, but I'd imagine there's a lot of myths and maybe misperceptions. I mean, do you feel there's a lot of understanding about the field, or do you feel there's a lot of...
Well, yeah, Bob, there are really two schools of thought when we talk about any kind of body language. One is an absolutist. And that means if I touch my nose, I'm lying. If I tweak my eyebrow, I'm lying. Those are not true. Look, any person can have an itchy nose. Any person can have an itchy eyebrow. Any person can do that because of something going on. So the first myth is that there are absolutes and that you can simply learn a simple thing. Now, there are good indicators and clusters of behavior that do tell us that a person may be deceptive because they're feeling fight or flight, that kind of thing. But that's myth one. Myth two is this. Everybody knows it. I use it always in my
Defensive,
classes.
closed.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that.
That's a
The
myth.
problem, yeah, I mean, it can mean that if suddenly I ask you a hard question, you do this.
Could
But
mean
it
you have
can
a little
also
gas
be,
too, right?
yeah, exactly. It could be a baseline. A person may sit with their arms crossed all the time. I worked with a British RAF officer who would stand like this, and I used him as an example. I would say, Peter, why do you hold your arms like that? He would drop his hands, and his arms are about that much longer than normal, and he just looked awkward standing there. So he would always cross his arms. The problem with some of those myths, my favorite myth, is that this means I'm telling the truth and this means I'm lying. And I'll explain why in a minute. But eye contact almost is one of the least understood things in human behavior, because in American culture, we make about 50% eye contact, but we think we make riveted eye contact. And what we find often is when a person is trying to convince you of something, they pay really close attention to your eyes to see if you believe them. So it's exactly the opposite. The problem with those myths, especially in business, is if you're a business guy, if you're a CEO of a company, and you stand in front of people and they don't know this means nothing, it means something. And if they don't know this means nothing, it means something. So you have to be careful that certain myths you have to be aware of when you're pitching or when you're talking to people. So
That's
that's
a
an
good
important
point.
part of the myth.
So that's what I would imagine you spend time with the executive talking about, ways to undo some of those habits maybe that may make them look unconvincing possibly.
Yep.
But
And I think most of us have a normal pattern of speech. Mark, there are four of us. Mark Bowden, who's a pretty famous actor in his day, his big fame was the streaker commercial for Nike, as you've
oh,
heard.
really? He's the British one, right?
Yeah. He's the British
funny.
one. Yeah, he's funny. Makes me laugh at least 4 times every show. But he was an actor and he teaches G7 leaders. And he has a whole system about what he calls the truth plane, where your hands are here and you're truthful, here, down here, there, in the grotesque. And it's about how do I look passionate enough without looking out of control. So all of those things that we think about as part of communication, some of it is cultural. For example, in America, we make a certain amount of eye contact. If you go to the Middle East, it's more eye contact. If you go to Asia, it's less eye contact. So culture plays a part. But then there's the other part that's just, we see presidential campaigns where a person's holding his hands up.
Yeah, who's that?
Holding his hands up, but his elbows are at his side. That doesn't look believable. That looks believable. Just that simple thing you can teach a leader to hold their elbows away from their side is powerful.
But hasn't that particular person gotten lots of coaching already? I guess it doesn't stick necessarily.
Some people coaching just doesn't stick.
But let's continue, because I think there are more myths. First of all, like I said, your podcast fascinates me. You four as a group fascinate me. Have you ever gone together as a group to Vegas and taken on the town, card playing? I mean, that it's not necessarily going to work there. There's not the magical tell that will.
Well, yeah, in Vegas, actually, we did our first live event last year in Vegas at a big casino there, and we had 100 people coming in to listen to us talk for a week and get to know us and all that. We'll do another one shortly, but we didn't go do cards and that kind of thing. Scott does it best when people say, do you play poker? He said, that's the one with cards, right? Because we're not necessarily card players. We're not necessarily those things.
That's a bluff, though. That's a bluff.
Yeah, exactly. But no, we haven't done that. As a matter of fact, this started in COVID. So we didn't meet each other the first time for a couple of years. We were all, Mark is in Canada, so he couldn't travel. I think the first time we met, Dr. Phil had us on his show to cover a topic.
Oh,
you're on Dr. Phil? 4 of us went to Hollywood. And, oh yeah, we've been on a few times. We know him pretty well. Great guy.
Wow.
But we were out for his show is the first time we met. He put us up in a hotel and we all met for drinks the first night. We were just pretty ecstatic after 2 years.
Okay, so I mean, but I guess there's no, like I heard on your show, there's no magical way to say if somebody's lying without looking at other factors, the baselining. Similarly, you can't go to an earnings presentation and know if the CEO is bluffing necessarily, or you may get some warning signs. But I mean, then again, mastering the skills, is it considered to be kind of a superpower or a dark art? I mean, is it really? Seems a little bit.
You know, it's funny. I was just on with a guy from one of our board group, which is a very small group of people that we connect with through the behavior panel. Once a week, we talk to them. And the guy said, I'm starting to feel like I have some dark power that's dangerous. And I said, well, not really. But what you need to be careful of is that you don't take advantage of people because you know something that they don't know and they're bleeding information. If you're doing that for your own needs, that's a little on the dark side. So yeah, of course, anything that you have, any ability you have another person doesn't have, whether it's money or some magical ability, you can overdo it, you can use it for wrong, or you could, take advantage of it and use it for right. And what I would say is you brought up like a CEO and an earnings call, that kind of thing. What we're looking for in this stuff is deviation from what's normal. So one of the things we look for to show stress or concern is an increased blink rate, for example. So if a guy's normally blinking every few seconds and he gets to a number and goes, you should go, wait a minute, what's up with that? Something has changed. And then we dig for why. The why is the big question.
Does it take a long time to do that baselining? Can you do it within the course of a conversation, or do you
can do it very quickly? I give you an example. I use eye movement a lot. And the reason I said that your eyes moving around does not indicate deception, I'm going to give everybody listening, and I don't know how broad your audience is, so I'll be careful which song I choose. Just pick a song that you love. I usually say, whatever your national anthem is, think of the fifth word. Try that, Bob. Watch and see what your eyes do. There you go. That's what I'm after.
The access memory.
Yeah, so you access memory, and what I'm after with that is trying to figure out where you go for that kind of memory. Now, the next time I ask you a question that should also go there and it goes somewhere else, I want to know why. And if I walk into your office and you're a CEO and I say, hey, Bob, where's that golf picture on the wall? And you go, boom, boom, boom. I've just baselined how your eyes go for information. So it's a pretty rapid process. And I often say, look, the guy sitting on the seat for an earnings call is not the same baseline as he has at home eating Cheetos. So you have to get a baseline for where he's at. Pardon me.
I see. So that makes it a little harder. Got to compare apples to apples, I guess.
That's exactly right. So a guy doing testimony and on the stand is very different.
But continue down this path. Let's get past myths and misperceptions and talk more about what it actually is. And as I understand, there's two parts of it. One is reading behavior, and one is your own body language. And I guess I just have, and I'm sure the audience have a bunch of questions. First of all, I mean, how widely are these tactics? When I mean tactics, the kind of thing you do, consulting to executives and to, I guess, law enforcement or military. Are they widely used? You'd imagine they are pretty widely used in military law enforcement, but maybe in business, would you say?
Well, I think some guys in business see the value. Look, everything we do, and I teach all kinds of people in business. And what I've said is, unless you mine salt for your own consumption, you're in the people business, no matter what you do. Every business I talk to lots of entrepreneurs. And whether they're air conditioning guys or tech guys, the technical part is the piece they're usually very, very, very good at. That's how they got to be where they're at. And by that, I mean, if you're an air conditioning company, you're repairing air conditioners is good, or you wouldn't be in business. Right. Often what's not good is the leadership inside the company, the back office function, how people interact, that flow. And this matters then when you're talking about the people side of it, not the technical side.
Yeah.
It matters. Pardon me.
Yeah. I mean, some people call those soft skills, but others, they call them leadership skills. I mean,
yeah, I think, the Army is full of people who don't know this too, by the way. We have good leaders and bad leaders in the military, good leaders and bad leaders everywhere. All this is a set of skills to let you know kind of what the person's feeling, maybe what they're thinking. We can't read thoughts. We can see deviation. We can see change, and we can understand that something is causing that change. And we look for that root cause, is what it gives you the skill to do.
Now, I think one of your superpowers or skills is the fact that you take what has worked on the battlefield to the boardroom. So,
yeah. Well, and I spent quite a few years in corporate America. I often say, if it were not for my corporate gig, I would not have the body language gig I have now, because I brought the skills from, I use a weird little twisted story. I brought the skills from being an interrogator and resistance trainer to being a construction manager. Oddly enough, I got out of the Army, decided I wanted a job, needed to make money, thought I'll try construction management. Did it for a couple of years. And they had this game. I was working for a company called Train. Everybody knows Train, hard to stop a
Sure.
train.
Big company.
And I was building public schools in Atlanta. And they had a little simulation where you had to go in and play some war game. They called it a war game, where you had to go through a whole exercise. And the person who won at the end got a little trophy. And my boss thought, hey, this guy's going to do well. I'll send him in. I went in and I was really angry. I was really angry that in July, while I was building public schools, they sent me to a game. So I kind of took my gloves off and manipulated the role players, did whatever I needed to do to get what I needed. And at the end, the guy running the show came over and said, you need to write a book. Whatever you're doing, I don't know what it is, but you need to write a book. And I kept saying, yeah, I don't know how to write. I don't have time for that. So for 2 years, he bugged me and found a writing partner for me. And I wrote my first book. So in a twisted way, the business side is what brought me to this. No, that's a later book. That's the most dangerous business book you'll ever write. You'll ever read.
Yep.
My first was somewhere over here, How to Spot a Liar. And you don't know. Yeah, it's
Great
someone
title.
back there, a liar.
This title too, they're compelling titles.
Thanks,
I gotta read.
I left that to the people who are smarter than me, the publishers. They were very smart.
But somehow you've found 10 or 11 books in you. That's
10. I'm working on 11 right now. So yeah.
But I guess a question again, back to the field that you're in, are there generally accepted standards and best practices?
Well, in terms of how we go about business, yeah, we're going to come to this business from, let me give you a wandering answer, and I'm going to start with where we come from. That matters. There's no standard like course for body language that you can go to University of Alabama and take, for example. This is a place that most of us who are currently considered experts came to from many different walks of life. So I came from interrogation, where I learned it piecemeal, put it together, bolted it together to work. Scott came from music production. He's a Grammy nominated music producer. And then left music when it started to kind of fall apart monetarily and went into the interrogation thing, where he does mostly white collar crime. Mark came from acting, where, body language is part of acting. And Chase came from the Navy. So that's 4 examples, and there are others out there. And since we started the show, there a whole lot of people are showing up and starting shows. It's good. But we come from different places. There's not really a credentialing organization that says you're an expert, you're an expert, you're an expert.
They're an association or an organization?
There are a couple of places. We get better as the years go. It's one of the things we probably need to be a little bit more aggressive about, and trying to create some governing body. And we've talked with a couple of other folks about that in the past. But there are certain, look, this started off years and years ago. The first body language experts were, believe it or not, Darwin and Duchesne were the first guys to really study all this stuff.
Is it the Duchesne smile I've heard you refer to?
The Duchesne smile. If you really want to find something interesting, go look up Duchesne, and I forget his first name. I think it was Francois. But he used these electrodes on this old man's face to show which muscles do what. Really bizarre kind of experiment. But the first book on body language really was by those 2 guys back in the 1860s.
Wow, that goes back.
So yeah, but nothing has changed is the fundamental thing. We're still functioning in the same way, moving. There's only, as Mark said yesterday, I was talking about apes. He said, yeah, when you got lips and eyebrows, there's only so much you can do with them. So we all kind of mimic each other. But then what that means is where you came from will probably have a lot to do with what your audience is as you move, and will also dictate how you need to think about ethics and how you deal with that.
Do you think there needs to be standards and maybe some kind of educational track? And before you answer, heard you reference research and papers. It seems to me there is some academic work being done. Maybe it's not part of a degree program, but it seems almost
there's a ton. There's a ton of what we all do is read those studies and track and move. And yes, I think there probably could be a great course in, I think this is such a fundamental skill that average people could use it. That's part of the reason we started the show. That it could be a good course, a good track in college or in school, high school, wherever you want to start.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it adds value. The thing I just showed you with eye movement, which is a basic skill, and you'll hear guys say it doesn't work. There's a study called The Eyes Don't Have It, where they say you can't tell if a person's lying from their eyes. That's not what we're suggesting. We're suggesting there's a discernible pattern in what you're doing when you're recalling information, and I can look for deviation and understand it. So, and you'll hear differing opinions by all kinds of people. There are a lot of absolutists on the internet. You'll find guys saying that when you scratch your nose, it means you're deceptive.
Hmm. I guess, how do
So
you
careful.
determine what's the right approach? I mean, I guess maybe like a track record, or I don't know.
I think you can look at track record. You can also look, the sniff test is important. Think about your own self. When you scratch your nose, are you lying? Or is your nose itching? You know what I'm saying?
I don't know. That's a good question. Probably, now I'm going to monitor more of my behavior and try to understand that. All right, let's get into some practical tips, I guess. I think our audience tends to be, it could be founders, executives of technology companies, startups, often people in the business world. What should the average founder or technology executive understand about the role of body language in executive communication?
I think the biggest one is being open, and apparently open is important, regardless of what your message is. If you're doing it this way, that's not perceived as open, and people may feel uncomfortable because you're doing it. This is one of my favorites for you to drop. If you're doing this today, it's called steepling.
Steepling.
When we're in a position of authority, we do this. And what you'll notice is as the person is feeling less like they're the expert in the room, their hands will rotate forward.
Almost
I've got
like
a
you're
great
praying,
picture.
It's almost like
Well,
you're
in my
praying. I don't
favorite,
know.
it is a lot like a praying. And then what happens when you feel compromised is your hands rotate down. I have a great photo I use in my classes of Tony Blair standing in front of Condoleezza Rice like this.
Totally subconscious, huh?
Yeah, and it's just in your head. So take your hands apart. Use your hands to make your point, raise your palms, show people that, take your elbows away from your side, and speak to them, not at them, is a powerful part of that. Look, I deal with founders all the time working for a private equity merchant bank.
Mhm.
And some of them are great communicators about what they do. Others are passionate, but their content stumbles their thought, stumbles what they're going to say. It doesn't matter how smart you are. It matters how smart people perceive you to be and how honest people perceive you to be. You can be the most honest guy on earth doing this, and the perception is going to be bad.
Are some people harder to train? Are some people just naturally good at, composing themselves?
And pardon me, I picked up something on vacation last week, is scratching my throat, but yeah.
Oh, you're coming through loud and clear. I guess the question is, obviously some people are better at it than others, and it comes naturally. What is your regimen? I mean, do you have a program for corporate executives? How does it work? Is it assignment based or project based or customized, or how does it
Well,
work?
you have to customize to people. I mean, you go talk to a person. Look, if I go way back in my career, when I had to work with people who need to learn to represent themselves as if they're honest when they're being deceptive to a source, when you're interrogating somebody, I can take you and another guy, and you'll need two very different skill sets. So the first thing you do is watch. It's based on experience. You go watch the person speak. You pay attention to what they're doing. Then you pick up on the things that are sending the wrong message. And here's the difference. If you get someone who is an absolutist who doesn't understand body language really, if they learned it from Google, they learned it from reading a book, the problem you're going to run into is that they're going to tell you not to cross your arms, or to cross your arms is okay because they just learned it that way. You have to know enough to know that even the myths have to be taken out of the person's behavior.
Yeah, that makes
And
a lot of sense.
you build it around their personality and their delivery method, not around yours.
Is there a workshop you spend time watching them in the wild, so to speak, doing presentations or going to meet? Or, I mean, is this mostly
I prefer that you give me, like, let's say you do an earnings call and you want to know what you could do better. I'd watch that earnings call and go, yeah, okay, here's what I see. And in some cases, you may tell a person, look, you look just fine. It's okay. The problem we run into a lot of times with executives is human nature is to defer to the alpha. And by that, I mean, let's take the military, where you have a senior person and people emulate them. The best example of people emulating an alpha is basic training. You put a drill sergeant, a drill instructor in charge, and people turn into that drill sergeant. That's how you turn a regular guy right off the street into a soldier. Well, in corporations, not as much in tech maybe as in some others, but the 800-pound gorilla is the guy in the corner office. So you're going to emulate his behavior and you
Is
create a
that because of the
bubble.
title, or is that because of his behavior?
Well, it's probably both. I mean, he signs your check at the end of the
Yeah.
day. And that's, if you want a great example, look at Donald Trump. Donald Trump, with that weird little thing he does with putting a finer point on stuff, all the people right up close to him and around him do exactly the same thing. They're emulating his behavior. Even if it's odd, they're emulating it.
Such peculiar mannerisms. You need a book, I think, just for him. I mean, it seems to me he's probably the outlier, isn't he? I don't know.
Well,
Yeah.
I've said about him when he was running for president, I said, the good thing is the body language circus. Whether you like him or don't like him, forget politics. He's
It's a
got
field
so
day.
much stuff. Yeah. All those faces, like when he's branding people and going and doing all that stuff.
And then you
It's just
get
odd.
the great memes where they take pictures and it's like they put captions. It's entertaining. Not, we won't get into politics right now, but I mean,
Right.
all right.
Stay
So
out
let's
of
say
politics. Yeah.
let's say you're preparing an executive. You want to help them boost their credibility, earn trust. You go into Shark Tank for you. You're going to do a pitch to investors. You give you lots of hard questions. Before you answer how they do that, and you've answered some of that already, is there a code of ethics? I mean, couldn't people use these to kind of deceive or hide body language?
Of course. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. I mean, look, like I said, in my interrogation days, let's be honest. I mean, I'm not talking about criminal investigation. I'm talking about intelligence interrogation. We have to often mask what we're talking about, what we know when we're asking you something. Because if I tell you everything I know, now it gets two things. If it's intelligence interrogation, now you know where my gaps are. If you happen to get away, then the enemy knows. Not only that, but if I tell you what I don't know, then it's easy for you to protect it. So we have to teach people to mask what they think and believe, for sure. Now, is there an ethics? Yeah, to me, that's where it gets to the person and where they come from. So, for example, in my case, not happy telling a guy how to lie to protect himself from something he's done. It's not how I'm wired, but there is no code of ethics for body language experts that says you must do X, Y, or Z. Certainly not.
Well, maybe if standards evolve and there's an organization at some point that's something that will come up.
Right.
Right. And
well, yeah,
so,
honestly, Bob, I honestly think it's a matter of time until AI can do a better job than we can.
oh boy, that's a little scary. Any other tips you can offer as far as how executives can master the art of having convincing body language?
Let me give you 5 things, 5 pieces of body language. Remember,
Perfect,
I'm a soldier, and everything you carry with you needs to be simple so you don't forget. So I'm gonna give you on my hand how to remember 5 pieces of body language, and I'll give you 1 piece of advice that will help you more than anything else. Let's call this this is called an emblematic gesture. This and this are things that mean something to your audience, has to be understood. So we'll call that a gesture. Okay. We're gonna use your hand to keep you something you'll always be able to carry it. Next is an illustrator. And if you think about the way people point and baton and illustrate what they're thinking, they're punctuating their mind's thoughts. So gesture, illustrator. The next, I'll cover it up, is a regulator. And it's the way you control conversations. So I use my middle finger because I can stop a conversation with my middle finger. It could be this, could be this, could be that. It's a way to control conversation. So gesture, illustrator, regulator. Next is adapter. And I'll use my ring finger because people do this when they're nervous. They twist the ring, they play with it. And it's a way of releasing nervous energy, or more importantly, as I always say, it's a way to make the unknown known. So if you're in a bad situation, you do something you always do, it makes you feel more comfortable. So it's self-soothing. So gesture, illustrator, regulator, adapter, and final is barrier, putting your hands in front of you, putting a cup in front of you, holding a bag in front of you, putting a big desk in front of you. That's a way to give yourself space. And it gets more complex from there. But if you can take those 5 pieces and get that in your head, and I'm going to tell you how, and then I'll show you how you can use it. Tomorrow, if you want to do this, take gesture. Right. And just take an index card or some Post-it note and stick it in your pocket. And all day, look until you notice them every time they come up. And if it takes you a week or 6 weeks or a year, do it. And then when you get that, go to illustrators and look.
What is the gesture telling you though? What are you looking for? When do you use the gesture?
That's messaging. People use gestures to message. Okay. So it will go very quickly. You know it. You recognize them. You'll see those. But
what does that have to do with the card? The card's a reminder, or what does that have to do with the
card? Just a reminder.
Okay.
Yeah,
got it.
just something to keep in your head that you're going to do this every day until it becomes
Okay. So
second
you're watching
nature.
your gestures. Is that the idea, or you're?
Yeah, yours and theirs. So
Okay.
if you're always gesturing, you're always doing stuff and they're not, that's alienating. Number one, right? You can see if I'm doing this all the time, it's part of the
Yeah.
reason you think Trump's
Weird.
behavior is weird is because he's always gesturing. But then you get that down. Now, illustrators, pay attention. This is the one that used to be used by presidents all the time. It's called batoning, using your finger, until Bill Clinton got in trouble with Monica Lewinsky and it turned into that. And now they all do this. So what you want to do is pay attention to your own illustrators and see when you're trying to convince a group of people, you want them to be more like theirs, more mirrored than not. Now, if your people are shoe starers, you don't want to be a shoe starer when you're talking to them because that telegraphs insecurity. That's a different story. But then
Okay.
you've got this, and then regulators, pay attention, especially if you're a leader, because this will stop people from talking in your group. Sitting back and listening and nodding will let them listen. But if you regulate by leaning forward in your chair when they're talking and you're in charge, you're the 800-pound gorilla. They're going to go,
somewhat aggressive.
oh, yeah. So you got to be careful with that regulating, whether it's with your hands, with your face, with your mouth, with signaling, whatever it is, whatever that is. And then the adapter is a way I release nervous energy. What we know is that people who are perceived as powerful and alpha typically move less than other people, meaning you're in a room, you stand quietly, people come to you, that's power, that's perception of power. If you fidget a lot, that's perceived as nervous, neurotic, and doesn't instill confidence in people. It's just not the way people are wired. And then finally, the barrier, it doesn't matter whether it means anything or not, the perception of this is powerful. If you're closing out people who are trying to share something with you, they're not going to share. So if you can learn to open and listen, be thoughtful, and just those are 5 pieces of body language that if you can get those in your head, just put them in your head, you'll be conscious of people around you. And there's a ton of other stuff around facial muscles and that takes time. And you brought it up, Bob. You watch it, you know, when we mention shoulder shrugs, what they mean. But an average person doesn't know that. An average person does know this. An average person does know this. Those are things that you can control and get your messaging more clear. If you're going to make a point, you illustrate, your hands go at the same time as your words, those kinds of things. That increases the power of your message. So hopefully it's helpful.
That is extremely helpful. Thank you. Very clear. I think it's very, you're making a complex topic, I think, more easily understandable. Is there anything else you'd like to share about anything you're working on now, or anything our audience should know about projects coming up? I don't know. You mentioned you have a book coming up on.
Yeah, I'm working on a book about, this is for me the most important one I've probably written. I've been working on this book for 20 years, literally, just because I needed to be older to get it. I mean, when I was young, I would not have understood these concepts about the cycles of life and how you perceive things and how that plays out. Because all the stuff when we were young, we learned this Gen X and Boomer, all that really matters very little at the end of the day. Once you have kids, that changes things. And what I've noticed in 40 years of being in the world working is it doesn't matter which generation you're in, you still got generational issues as you get to maturity, as you reach your parents passing and that kind of thing. And how that stuff works in your head and how it affects you at work, I think is an important part that we haven't paid a lot of attention to. And I've worked alongside the best part of leaving the military. When you're in the military, everybody you know is young and fit. Everybody retires at 40. And then when you leave the military, you have friends who die of old age. You have friends who have children all around you. When you're in an operations unit, you don't have a whole lot of that. So it's been eye-opening for me. And I always say I learned a hell of a lot more about people after the military than in my days of interrogating. So I think it's an important one.
Well, first of all, thank you for coming on the podcast. I'm going to leave information in our show notes. If there's any resources you'd like to send me, any links to share with the audience, I will go ahead and do that. And perhaps we'll have you on again to do a mini behavior panel, and I'll have some videos of executive pitches. You can tell me which ones are lying, which ones are going to be getting the Peace Prize. I don't know. That should be fun, right?
Love to do it, Bob. I also would tell you, you should bring Scott on for your entrepreneur pitch because he's a master of that. He's a master of that.
we'll have you both on for that. That would be great.
That'd be great.
It's
to.
been a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Gregory. Look forward to staying in touch, and we'll talk soon. Okay?
Thank you, Bob.
Take care.